In the heart of vibrant West Hollywood, where neon lights keep flickering through the night, the house that once belonged to Sal Mineo now stands eerily silent, as if time itself had frozen at the very moment he fell. Once hailed as a prodigy of the silver screen, once standing beside James Dean under the glow of the spotlight, Sal had touched the peak of fame, only to be abandoned by Hollywood itself simply because he dared to openly admit he was bisexual. But even that was not the greatest tragedy, because his death was not only sudden and brutal, but also shrouded in layers of mystery that made all of Hollywood shiver. And only after he was gone did every secret hidden inside his home finally come to light. At the height of Hollywood's dazzling 1,950 seconds, the name Sal Mineo once shook all of America. From a skinny Bronx boy, he skyrocketed to fame after a single-role John Plato Crawford in Rebel Without a Cause, the film that defined the era of James Dean and Natalie Wood. When Plato looked up at Dean with eyes both innocent and desperate, audiences understood they were witnessing something that reached far beyond the screen, a real soul crying out for help in a fabricated world. Mineo carried a fragile beauty, eyes that could tell stories, and a loneliness so palpable no one could look away. The press called him the Switchblade Kid, while young people worshipped him as an idol. His photos covered dorm room walls, magazines lined up to put him on their covers, and studios competed to write scripts tailored just for him. At 17, he walked the Oscars' red carpet, becoming one of the youngest actors ever nominated for Best Supporting Actor. But just when Hollywood believed Mineo would become the next James Dean, the first cracks in his career quietly began to appear. As the glow of Rebel Without a Cause slowly faded into the past, Sal Mineo began to realize the true cost of fame. Studios once praising him as the symbol of American youth now confined him within that very image. To them, Sal would forever be the lost boy with Plato's pleading eyes, not an actor capable of growing up. Whenever he proposed roles that demanded more emotional depth, the answer was always the same: the audience doesn't want to see you change. While his contemporaries were given the chance to take on serious dramatic roles, Mineo found himself trapped between fame and age. He once said bitterly, "I can't grow up, because they won't allow me to grow up." Although Exodus 1960 earned him a Golden Globe and his second Oscar nomination, the cracks only deepened. Behind the glowing cinema lights was a man struggling to break free from his own shadow, an artist desperate to be recognized for his talent, yet imprisoned by the very role that had made him immortal. Alongside all of this, Sal never hid the truest part of himself. He openly acknowledged his same-sex relationships, something that made Hollywood at the time distance itself from him even more. On the set of Rebel Without a Cause, the connection between Sal Mineo and James Dean went far beyond simple friendship. The two shared the same kind of loneliness, two rebels misunderstood by the world. An assistant director recalled, "There was a moment when Dean sat next to Mineo, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. No one said anything, but the air felt like it stopped moving." That gaze was later kept exactly as it was in the film, the look that made audiences feel that Plato did not merely admire Jim Stark, but was truly in love with him. When Dean died in the 1955 crash, Sal completely broke down. He disappeared for weeks, skipped the set, and refused to speak to the press. A friend said he would just sit there staring at Dean's photo, as if he believed that if he waited long enough, the man in the picture would step out of the frame. Nicholas Ray, the director of Rebel, was another haunting figure in Sal's life. Ray saw in Mineo what others could not, a purity mixed with sorrow. He often called Sal into his small room, thick with cigarette smoke and dim red light, just to talk. People whispered that something existed between them beyond the boundaries of mentor and student, but no one ever had proof. All that was certain was this: whenever Ray looked at Sal through the lens, his eyes softened, as if he were filming a fragment of his own memory. Then Montgomery Clift appeared, like a spiritual older brother. Another symbol of fragile beauty crushed by Hollywood. Clift once told Sal, "You have the kind of eyes that can tell my story." The two quickly became soulmates, kindred spirits who understood the exhaustion of having to live in a world that refused to tolerate vulnerability. A friend of Clift said, "I once saw them sitting in Monty's car in the middle of the night, talking for hours. And at that point, it was no longer just friendship. It was the rare kind of empathy shared by two people wounded in the same way by the world." By the late 60s, during the loneliest years of his life, Sal was seen often at The Patch, a well-known gay bar in Los Angeles. He didn't hide, and he didn't run. One staff member recalled, "He came alone, sat in a corner booth, and when someone recognized him, he just smiled. No showy gestures, no fear, as if he had finally found a moment of freedom." By 1972, Sal no longer wanted to conceal anything. In an interview with journalist Bose Hadley, he publicly admitted that he was bisexual. "I think most of us are like that, only no one is brave enough to say it." That explosive sentence stunned all of Hollywood. In an era when even a rumor about one's sexuality could destroy a career, Sal had done what no one else dared. He told the truth. The consequences arrived immediately. A major role at MGM was canceled just 1 week before shooting, without explanation. Studios cut ties, directors avoided him, and friends who had once partied with him grew silent. Hollywood, the very place that had once celebrated him as a prodigy of the silver screen, now turned its back, cold and unforgiving. The invitations vanished, auditions ended within minutes, and rumors about his sexuality spread faster than any script. A director who had worked with him later said, "Sal was talented, but Hollywood wasn't ready for his honesty." Considered unmarketable, Mineo was slowly pushed out of the star orbit from Oscar-level leads to small television roles, and eventually even those disappeared. Sal understood this was the price of honesty. Yet, he never once expressed regret. In a conversation with his close friend Courtney Burr III, he simply smiled and said, "I've been playing someone else my whole life. If whatever time I have left is only enough for me to be myself, then it's worth it." Unshaken by Hollywood's coldness, Sal Mineo carved out another path for himself, the stage. There, he could breathe freely, doing the very things that the silver screen had suffocated in him for years. In 1969, he directed and starred in Fortune and Men's Eyes, a groundbreaking play that dared to portray the homosexual world inside prison, a place where people were forced to live truthfully with their instincts. The media called it a slap in the face of American hypocrisy, while critics praised Sal for turning the pain of the marginalized into a bold, artistic statement. To him, the stage was not an escape, but the final battlefield where truth could still be spoken. "I don't want to be just a lovesick boy or a sexy poster image. I want to be taken seriously as an actor," he said in an interview with Playboy. But in an industry that worshipped nothing but glamour, such ambition became a kind of sin. The pressure and scrutiny exhausted him time and time again, yet he never surrendered. Sal wasn't fighting to reclaim fame, he was fighting to break the mold Hollywood forced upon those who dared to be different. That stubbornness, quiet, proud, ultimately made him a symbol for artists brave enough to live honestly, those who refused to let their dreams be defined by others. Yet behind that strength and resilience was a world so silent it was almost terrifying. After long rehearsal days, Sal Mineo returned to his small apartment at 8563 Holloway Drive, West Hollywood, where he lived alone, with no housekeeper, no family, no laughter. The room was only a few square meters wide, its yellow light falling onto bare walls and an old wooden desk. On it were unfinished scripts, a few photos with James Dean and Nicholas Ray, and a small mirror where he often looked at himself and forced a faint smile, as if reminding himself that he still existed. That apartment was the place where Sal hid from the world, but also the cage that imprisoned his own soul. In the suffocating stillness, the ticking clock on the wall seemed to remind him of how far he had drifted from the stage lights of his youth. There, the old walls still echoed with the breath of the young man who once captivated all of America, now reduced to a shadow, trapped somewhere between memory and oblivion. The simplicity of that space reflected his longing for peace, yet it also testified to a loneliness he could never escape. And still, deep inside, he kept a fragile hope that one day he would return to the stage. But more than the stage, what Sal longed for most was to be genuinely loved, even though, deep in his heart, he never dared to believe that such love was truly meant for him. He knew too well the dark side of the thing Hollywood called love, where emotions were priced like contracts and promises vanished as quickly as flashbulbs. People said that Sal had indeed loved deeply once, but every time affection approached him, he stepped back, as if afraid someone would see what lay behind the mask he wore. He always feared that people only loved the image of Sal Mineo on screen, not the real man in everyday life, a friend recalled. Perhaps that was why he chose solitude, as if loneliness was the only way to keep himself from being betrayed. By day, Sal poured himself into the stage, where he borrowed lines from scripts to say the things he truly felt. But when the velvet curtain closed, his world dissolved into silence and illusions. He often talked to himself, wrote letters addressed to himself, and never sent them. In the letters found later, people read the scribbled words, "I miss the feeling of being trusted." In Hollywood, everything is a performance, even when you're not on stage. On late nights, Sal turned on old jazz records, the kind of music that echoed like memories of his golden years. He sat on the floor, holding a glass of liquor, his distant gaze as if speaking to the dead. Perhaps Dean, perhaps Clift, those wandering souls who resembled him. A neighbor recalled, "Sometimes I heard him laugh, then go silent, like he was talking to someone inside his own mind." Then, in the midst of that quiet that seemed to offer no escape, fate gently opened a door, a small one, but just enough for him to see the light again. Yet, no one could have imagined that it would also be the very last door that closed on his life forever. In 1976, he was invited to star in P.S. Your Cat is Dead, the story of a man who is betrayed, robbed, and yet still believes in love. The role seemed as if it had been written for him, someone who had lost everything but still clung to faith. The press called it the comeback role of Sal Mineo. Friends said he smiled and whispered, "This time, maybe I'm really coming back." No one imagined that just a few days later, that light would suddenly be extinguished, abrupt, brutal, and silent, like a door closing in the middle of the night. On the evening of the 12th of February 1976, after a rehearsal for the play, Sal drove his old Datsun back to his apartment. As he stepped out of the car, a stranger approached from a dark alley and attacked him with a weapon. No one knew what had happened between them. All that was known was that moments later, Sal collapsed by the curb, his hand still gripping his keys, as if he had still been trying to open the door and return home. Neighbors heard a faint cry, rushed out, and saw Sal lying motionless at the entrance of his apartment. "Sal, are you okay?" someone asked, but he only breathed weakly, unable to speak anymore. When the ambulance arrived, his eyes were still open, staring up at the quiet night sky. Although he was taken to the hospital, Sal Mineo did not survive closing the life of an actor who had once touched glory, yet was forever misunderstood by the very world that had created him. The initial investigation was chaotic. Police assumed it was a botched robbery, but quickly dismissed the theory when they found that all his belongings were still intact: wallet, watch, cash. No signs of struggle, no clear motive. Rolling Stone described the case as a tragedy with suspiciously personal undertones, suggesting the killer might have known the victim. A few weeks later, police arrested one 9-year-old Lionel Ray Williams, a pizza delivery worker with a history of petty theft. Williams claimed he had acted in self-defense, but his account was contradictory and inconsistent. People magazine reported that he was convicted of second-degree murder, though the case remained enveloped in doubt. When everything was over, people continued to ask, was Sal killed for daring to live truthfully with his identity, something considered sinful in Hollywood at the time? Or was it merely a random, meaningless accident, as sudden as the lights going out after a final performance? No one knows. Only one thing was clear. He died at the very moment when it seemed he was finally about to be. In the days that followed, the entire city seemed to sink into silence. Major news outlets published only brief lines, describing his death as a failed robbery, cold, detached, and absolutely no mention of the man behind it all. In the Los Angeles Times, the next morning's article contained just 2 short paragraphs, with no reference to his 2 Oscar nominations and no acknowledgement of the talent Hollywood had abandoned. But in the small bars of West Hollywood, once frequented by queer artists, people spoke about him for many nights after. Someone said, Sal was the first person who dared to tell the truth in a place where everyone else was acting. The director of Fortune and Men's Eyes, the play Sal had once directed, said through tears, he always believed that theater could save people. But the world didn't save him in time. Friends and former colleagues like Paul Newman, Shelley Winters, and others who had worked with him sent their condolences. Some admitted that they mourned not only a friend but also felt guilt for staying silent when Sal was ostracized, for letting him drift away from a world he had once illuminated. After the funeral, a few local newspapers reprinted the final line, Sal Mineo, the rebel of rebel without a cause, dies in an attack. No one mentioned his passion for art. No one said he was one of the first to openly acknowledge his sexuality in an industry still ruled by prejudice. It was just a small, lonely piece of news, buried between crime reports and movie theater ads. And yet, for film lovers, Sal never disappeared. Old fans went to Holloway Drive, leaving flowers at the parking lot where he fell. Someone scribbled on the wall, Plato is still lonely. Police erased it after a few days, but neighbors said that on windy nights, they still heard footsteps and the sound of a car door closing as if Sal were still returning home after the final rehearsal of his life. And then, when everything was over, only one witness remained to that tragedy, the small apartment on Holloway Drive, where the final light of his life suddenly went out. In the heart of West Hollywood, where white buildings rise among neon lights, there is a narrow alley just wide enough for 2 cars to squeeze past each other. If no one told you, you would never think this place had once been the home of a movie star. A low building, painted pale yellow, with moss-covered walls, narrow, worn-out windows, as if time had frozen there in 1976. That apartment, according to the former manager, looked like the fortress of a man who had nothing left to lose. He lived alone, with no housekeeper, no close friend staying with him. Neighbors said Sal often sat by the window looking out at the street, smoking and writing lines by hand with his left hand. Once, someone saw him laugh to himself and then suddenly cry. In Hollywood, they were accustomed to people who acted well, but few knew there were people who could not stop acting, even when no one was watching anymore. After Sal died, police sealed the apartment for months. When they reopened it, the script of P.S., "Your cat is dead," was still folded open on the last page. Beside, it was a photo of James Dean smiling with his head tilted, a picture taken in 1955. The investigator said, maybe that was the first thing he looked at every morning. On the desk were a few handwritten draft sheets, lines of dialogue he had been revising, a cup of cold coffee, and a cigarette that had not been lit. In a drawer, police found several letters from old friends, one of which was an invitation to the play's opening night still unopened. The small radio was still plugged in, the dial set to the station he listened to every evening. Everything remained frozen at the moment of fate, as if time inside that apartment had chosen to stop flowing along with its owner. In the 1,980 seconds, the apartment was sold to an investor. They repainted the walls and replaced all the furniture, but kept the parking space where the murder happened. To this day, people still call it the carport. Every year on February 12, a few elderly fans come by, quietly placing flowers and lighting candles. Some even bring copies of The Rebel Without a Cause script. Open to the page with the scene where Plato looks up at Jim Stark, a small ritual for an old soul. Today, young lovers of classic cinema still visit this place as a kind of silent pilgrimage. They stand before the old iron gate, take a few photos, listen to the story of the actor once held by James Dean on screen, and then fall silent, as if afraid to break something sacred. To them, Sal Mineo is not just a forgotten actor, but a symbol of courage of a generation that dared to live truthfully. And that apartment, though small, remains a monument to a heart that burned brightly until its final moment. If you stand under the porch at midnight, you will hear the wind slipping through the door, cracks a sound both cold and warm, like the breath of someone who never finished speaking. The wooden door trembles softly, the curtain sways even when no one touches it. Perhaps it's the wind, or perhaps it's something that has not yet faded away. Sal Mineo's apartment still stands there silent, like a pause that has never fully closed. And, whenever people walk past, the light reflecting off that small window makes them stop, because in that moment, everyone sees a reflection of themselves. Lonely, misunderstood, yet still longing to be loved. The legacy of Sal was not only held within the small home on Holloway Drive, but also carried on in the memories and hearts of those who once loved him. After his sudden death, newspapers spoke only of the case, and few mentioned the quiet life he had lived. A brave artist, a man who knew how to love and how to give, even when he had nothing left to receive. His family and closest friends quietly continued that journey, tending to the legacy and the name he left behind. Sal's sister became the central figure in managing his estate, his will, and his image, making sure everything was handled with absolute respect. His estate was not vast, only a few $1,000s, far too little for someone who had been nominated for 2 Oscars. But his true value did not lie in that number. Sal had used most of the money he earned to nurture the dreams of others, funding free acting classes for children in the Bronx, helping young artists in Los Angeles rent theaters, buy props, or simply using his Holloway apartment as a space where they could rehearse. He once said, "If I can't buy myself a ticket back into Hollywood, at least I can help someone get halfway there." Later, his former students still spoke about the small, candle-lit room, the place where Sal taught them not only how to act, but how not to be ashamed of who they were. When he died, they organized a memorial performance called The Last Candle on Holloway. One student wrote, "Sal didn't teach me how to be famous. He taught me how to be brave. That is the real legacy." From the outside, his life looked like a tragedy. A fame cut short, a career left unfinished, a lonely death. But with time, people began to realize that Sal Mineo had left Hollywood something far more precious, the voice of truth. In the 1,970 seconds, when coming out could destroy an entire career, he still dared to speak, dared to live honestly. Because of people like him, later generations of actors could express their identities on screen without fear. In 2011, the book Sal Mineo, a biography by Michael Greg Michaud, was published, restoring his image as a symbol of courage. The book revealed that in his final years, Sal had quietly donated to organizations supporting LGBTQ+ youth in Los Angeles, never once attaching his name. Michaud wrote, "He understood what loneliness felt like, and because of that, he spent the rest of his life standing by those who were lonely too." Now, the little apartment on Holloway is not just the place where a star fell. It is a stopping point for those seeking light, both in art and within themselves. On the old wall, someone once wrote in white paint, "You can't kill kindness. You can only forget it." No one knows who wrote it, but every year, someone quietly returns to repaint the words so they remain clear. because perhaps the only thing that never dies is the kindness and the desire to live truthfully that Sal Mineo left for this world. Sal Mineo did not leave behind only 2 Oscar nominations. He left behind a spiritual legacy, the courage to live authentically in a Hollywood built on illusions, where fame can sometimes be a sentence. He showed us that true art does not live only in the light, but also in the darkness carried by those who dare to speak what they believe. But the question still lingers: is trading freedom for fame worth it? And if today you were standing under the spotlight of your own era, what would you choose: to be loved or to be yourself? If Sal Mineo's story made you think, leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe so you can join us in discovering Hollywood's forgotten legends.